Taliban roasts the American idiocracy. You heard that correctly. The Taliban roasts the American idiocracy and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, back from a 2-week vacation and very happy to be back. I know Christopher is happy for me to be back too. And we have with us Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Welcome back, podcast listeners. We appreciate you being with us. And a lot happened, of course, when we were gone, including Andrew Cuomo, right? That's a huge thing. He actually resigned, which I never thought I would see that day. But we're not going to cover that today. We're going to cover the most recent news, which is how the Taliban has easily and so effortlessly, at least it seems effortlessly, taken over the entire country of Afghanistan just because the United States is trying to leave and in the process of leaving. You would think that the Taliban would take them maybe years to come back after the United States had worked so hard to build a Western-style democracy, or at least a democracy that would be more acceptable to the Afghan people. Well, that didn't work. Instead, we have the Taliban firmly in control and Americans still trying to get out, and tens of thousands of Afghanis trying to get out as well because they do not want to live under Taliban rule. And so, podcast listeners, you won't believe this. A Taliban spokesman was asked the question about whether the Taliban is going to allow freedom of speech in Afghanistan. So, Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahideen held a press conference on Tuesday in Kabul, and Zabihullah was asked if the Afghan Islamic government will honor freedom of speech. Now, this was a press conference of the Taliban. Taliban had just regained control of the capital city of Kabul. Here they are, and they're sitting there, and this spokesman is asked the question, are you going to honor freedom of speech? I mean, okay, it's a fair question. I'm glad the question was asked. But you won't believe his answer. And this is why we came up with the title, The Taliban Roasts the American Idiocracy, of how stupid the United States looks and is sometimes in its policy decisions. Certainly the Biden administration is making us look this way. But I'll talk more about this in a minute. First, you've got to hear the clip. Here it is.
دا سوال خو باید د فیسبوک له ادارې سره چې د بیان د ازادۍ دعوت دوی کوي او دلته خلک د بیان د ازادۍ.
This question should be asked to those people who are claiming to be promoters of freedom of speech, who do not allow publication of all information. I can ask Facebook company. This question should be asked to them.
Once again, the reporter asked the question, well, what about freedom of speech? Are you going to honor that, Taliban, now that you're back in control? And this spokesman for the Taliban, Zabihullah Mujahideen, says, well, you should ask Facebook and the American people, because apparently Facebook doesn't allow freedom of speech, which is true. It's absolutely true. For example, Donald Trump isn't allowed to have a Facebook page or a Twitter account or a YouTube account. All of these social media companies have banned a president of the United States, a former president of the United States. They have banned him. And here we have a reporter asking the Taliban, who just took over in record time after the United States had been in Afghanistan for more than a decade. The Taliban says, well, hey, look, we're in charge. And rather than asking us about whether we're going to honor freedom of speech, maybe you should look inward and ask Facebook why they don't honor freedom of speech. That's a pretty good answer. Obviously, it's a very cynical answer from a very evil organization. And the Taliban is an evil organization. Let's be clear about that. But there's something incredibly funny about this at the same time, if it weren't so sad, but it is funny. And that is that we have the Taliban back in control, and we don't have a president who can actually speak to American values of what it is that we tried to leave behind. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute as well, because this is really important. We don't have statesmen or stateswomen anymore in the United States. Very, very few. Certainly we don't have them in the White House. So in the Daily Caller, Sullivan says fair amount of U.S. weapons have fallen into the Taliban hands. Podcast listeners, if this weren't so sad, it's almost hard to make this stuff up. It's true, but it's almost difficult to understand how this could happen. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan confirmed the Taliban has seized a fair amount of U.S. military equipment in Afghanistan Tuesday, adding that the United States is unsure where much of the material has gone. Not material, it's military equipment. And the Taliban has seized it, a fair amount of it at least, according to this article from the Daily Caller. President Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan left billions of dollars worth of firearms, vehicles, and other military equipment in the hands of the Taliban. The defense material was intended for use by the Afghan government, prior to the Taliban taking over, that is, but its military dissolved in face of Taliban aggression in a matter of days. So, podcast listeners, we have a country that has a military. The Afghan government has a military. That military was trained by the United States military, the most powerful military in the world, and that military fell. The Afghan military fell in the matter of days in the face of a Taliban advance. That's how much they fear the Taliban. That's how fierce the Taliban is. That's how weak the Afghan government and its military was. And then, of course, that naturally brings up so many questions, namely, why were we there so long if that was really going to be the ultimate outcome anyway? And this is really my argument with this particular country. If you have people that are living in the 7th and 8th and 9th century, it's the 21st century, but they are still living in that century or those centuries, 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. How is it that we think that we're going to be able to bring them into the 21st century in the matter of 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 4 or 5 generations? Is it really something that we're supposed to be doing? And I really think that's the question that we should be asking ourselves moving forward, which is, if we always knew that the Taliban was going to take over anyway, then why were we still there? Why? And I know, of course, the military experts out there in podcast land are going to say, well, it's because we get so much intelligence. Okay, fine. Keep the intelligence people on the ground and a very limited military presence, if that's what you think that we need to do. Let's have that discussion. Okay, let's at least have that discussion. Let's try to sell it to the American people and explain to them what's really going on. I really feel as though we've never really had a good explanation as to why we stayed in Afghanistan for so long. And I will tell you this, as a conservative, I've thought for many years, it's really about a lot of the contractors who are hired. I'm not talking about the American military, who I honor. I'm talking about defense contractors and so many other people who, the military industrial complex, the desire to keep the military industrial complex fully fueled with monies. And the way you do that is by staying engaged in a place like Afghanistan, where you could dump an unlimited amount of dollars and never see any results. Really never see any lasting results. That's the important thing. Lasting results are those results that are still there when you leave. And that doesn't seem like something that could ever actually occur or ever happen. And so, in my opinion, this podcast is very well titled, The Taliban Roasts the American Idiocracy, because America looks like an idiocracy, just like the movie Idiocracy, where Luke Wilson, the actor, is frozen in time, wakes up hundreds of years later, and finds himself in America, but it is not a democracy, it's an idiocracy because everybody's an idiot. And he becomes now the smartest man in the country because the country has just gone to hell in a handbasket and everything's falling apart. No one knows how to do anything. There's no engineering. There's no science. Follow the science. Kind of sounds a little bit familiar. And people then politicize science, in which case there is no science. And then, so hundreds of years in the future, Luke Wilson, the actor, in this movie, Idiocracy, it wakes up and he becomes the most important person, the smartest person, and there isn't enough food. And none of the people who are running the country and the White House can understand why it is that all the food that's being grown on the farmland, why is all that food dying? Well, because they're watering it with Brawndo, and Brawndo is like Gatorade. So they think that Gatorade is going to work to water, all the food, but of course it's killing all of the plants, or the plants are half dead and they won't produce any vegetables. And that's what they think they need to do to keep the food growing. So Luke Wilson is in a cabinet meeting with these idiots, trying to explain to them why you shouldn't use Brawndo. You should use water to water the plants. And he's like beside himself because he's like, this is so easy. What happened to this country? Why are people so stupid? Why can't they just figure out and use their common sense and try different things? What happened to science? Whatever happened to all the stuff we learned in the past? It's all gone. Sounds very much like America Today, where we have a wonderful clip from Idiocracy. And here's Luke Wilson with the cabinet talking to them about why Brawndo is a bad idea. You should be using water instead to irrigate the farms. Here it is.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops?
Yes.
Water? Like out the toilet?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be out of the toilet, but yeah, that's the idea.
But Brawndow's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
Okay, look. The plants aren't growing, so I'm pretty sure that the Brawndow's not working. Now, I'm no botanist, but I do know that if you put water on plants, they grow.
Oh, well, I've never seen no plants grow out of no toilet.
Hey, that's good. You sure you ain't the smartest guy in the world?
So that's a clip from the movie Idiocracy. If you haven't seen it and you want a great laugh, you might want to cry too, because it reminds you a lot about modern America today. You must see that movie, Idiocracy, where they try to use Brawndo, which is kind of like a Gatorade substance, to water and irrigate farms, and therefore they are starving. Well, today in modern America, we have an idiocracy as well, and it is in the White House. Namely, an idiocracy that thinks it's okay to bring people across the border, America's southern border, and they have coronavirus, or they're not being tested for coronavirus, but they certainly have it, many of them. In fact, I think a majority of them probably do, at least that's what I read recently. And then they are relocated throughout the country with coronavirus. And then you, as an American citizen, you have your citizenship, and you're being told that you need to have a vaccine passport to go inside of a restaurant, at least in New York City. That is the case. So we have that set of contradictions, and we have the other set of contradictions set up by the Biden White House, namely that we have tens of thousands of Afghanis who want to come into the United States because they were cooperating and helping the United States military in defeating the Taliban, because at least some people wanted a better life, or at least it seemed like they wanted a better life, and we're going to leave those people behind. Now, to be fair, there are some new reports out that some of those Afghanis will be relocated into the United States, or at least put into temporary holding facilities until there is a decision as to where to put them or where to send them, or whether or not they should be sent back. But do you get my point here, podcast listeners? I mean, we have people who helped us in Afghanistan. They gave us intelligence. And so therefore, by the Taliban standards, those individuals who are Afghanis are traitors, and they will be summarily executed, as many have already been. So we're going to leave them there. And we didn't have a plan for that. We just were going to fly, hundreds of planes in and evacuate American citizens. By the way, there are still many American citizens still there. Many of them are, I think some are contractors, but I'm not entirely sure who is there. The information is not very reliable. Nonetheless, what we do see on TV is chaos. And what it looks like is an idiocracy, because here is the most powerful country with the most powerful military in the world, and we can't figure out how to extricate ourselves from Afghanistan in a way that looks respectable. And we also don't have, as I said a few minutes ago, any kind of statesmanship It doesn't exist anymore from the White House, which is, of course, something that I think all Americans, Democrat, Independent, and Republican, want to see. What is statesmanship? Statesmanship is that thing that a president has that speaks to American values and why we were there in Afghanistan to begin with, what it is that we tried to accomplish. To be honest with the American people about what it is that caused us to fail and why our values are timeless, no matter if we succeeded or failed in trying to prevail in Afghanistan with those values. And what do I mean by that? Well, to be more specific, Senator Joni Ernst, that was easy for me to say, of Iowa. She's a United States Senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst. She is speaking on American principles about, she's speaking about it on Fox News. And what she spoke about is how the United States of America, when we went in there, our first goal was to, of course, get intelligence information about terrorism and break it up and destroy it and ultimately find Osama bin Laden. But while there, what we realized is the subjugation of women was so massive, so great. It was so, by great, I mean, it was so overwhelming that by the Taliban of women that we were trying to modernize the country and make women have more rights and be viewed as human beings. And the best way to do that, as we thought, was to build schools for women. Because if you have women who are educated, then they are creating value for society and they're less likely to be treated as slaves or second-class citizens or property, which is the way they were being treated by the Taliban. And I have no doubt that's the way the Taliban will treat them moving forward. So one of the American principles that Joni Ernst of Iowa was speaking about is that principle of equality, okay? That men and women are equal, okay? They're equal under the law. They should have opportunities that are equal. Not equal outcomes, equal opportunities. That clearly does not exist in much of the Middle East, certainly not Afghanistan. We went in there and tried to change that. We tried to change hearts and minds. That is uniquely American. And Biden can't even speak to that because he's just so stupid. He's so useless. But Joni Ernst did on Fox News. We have that clip. It's very brief, and here it is.
We have women, girls that are being threatened by the Taliban, others that are being killed by the Taliban. We know that there are many other violent extremist organizations that are reconstituting in Afghanistan as we speak. This is a sincere tragedy for everyone.
Yeah, of course it is. Because all we hear about is the negativity. You know, America is weak, America's falling apart, America's doing a bad job with respect to leaving Afghanistan. But no one is really talking about, and this really is the job of the president, by the way, which is what I mean by statesmanship. No one is really talking about what it is that we tried to achieve while we were there, what was achieved while we were there, even if the Taliban reverses what we did. It doesn't change the fact that our moral superiority exists. I'm going to say that again. We are morally superior to the Taliban, without question. And our values and our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and the Declaration speak to our values. And we try to, whether right or wrong, we try to change hearts and minds in Afghanistan. And that makes America, as Ronald Reagan said, a shining city on a hill. Because no other country would have ever taken on that task. With a country, you know, no one would try to bring people who were in the 7th, 8th, and 9th century into the 21st century. But we did it for the women in Afghanistan. We did it for the children of Afghanistan to try to break the cycle of the Taliban, which is constantly trying to bring people back hundreds and hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years. And that's exactly what they're going to try to do again. And so Joni Ernst is the only United States senator, let alone high-level public official that I know, who has had a level of statesmanship with respect to our engagement in Afghanistan for the past decade. Biden, of course, certainly didn't do it. And this is what America is longing for. They're longing for leadership and statesmanship that speaks to who we are and why we are that shining light on a hill. And that's why I'm calling this podcast, The Taliban Roasts the American Idiocracy, because we don't have that statesmanship, and we need it now more than ever. And why do we need it? Because our true opponent in the world is China. That is our true opponent in the world. We have, and talk about evil. I mean, here's the country, right? Not the Chinese people. I'm talking about the CCP, okay? The Communist Party of China. That is the organization that released the coronavirus, okay? And has killed, I have no doubt, millions of people across the globe. That's who our real enemy is. These are evil people. The Taliban, yes, they're evil. But China has the power to end our country as we know it. They are our true enemy. And China is touting the United States' humiliation in Afghanistan and warns Taiwan about it. China is literally doing that. So in the Washington Free Beacon, it says, China touts U.S. humiliation in Afghanistan in its warning to Taiwan. China is poised to fill the vacuum in Afghanistan as the United States flees the Taliban takeover. China says U.S. humiliation in Afghanistan should be a warning sign to Taiwan and other U.S. allies in the region that the American military won't come to help if war breaks out in the future. As Taliban militants reclaim control of war-torn Afghanistan after the Biden administration decision to remove all U.S. troops from the country, China is stepping in to fill the power vacuum. Communist Party officials have been talking to Taliban leaders. And China's embassy in Afghanistan is operating normally, even as the United States conducts an emergency evacuation of its personnel and its embassy in the country. Chinese state-controlled media and Communist Party loyalists gloated on Sunday over America's humiliation as the Taliban marched into the Afghan capital, Kabul, forcing U.S.-backed President Ashraf Ghani to flee the country while his government crumbled. China is now offering to fund post-war construction efforts in Afghanistan as part of its Belt and Road Initiative, a sweeping Communist Party infrastructure project that has helped the CCP gain a foothold in many countries across the globe. The catastrophe in Afghanistan provides China enough opportunity to subvert U.S. influence and power in critical regions such as the Middle East. While the Biden administration scrambles to secure the safety of Americans stationed in the country, China is exploiting the situation to send a warning to its regional enemies, primarily Taiwan. The CCP is also promoting Afghanistan as an example of American decline across the world. The U.S. lost. It was a no-brainer, tweeted Chen Weihua, editor of the communist-controlled China Daily, on Monday. So China is gloating, podcast listeners. They are gloating that not only did we lose the war in Afghanistan, or we lost the territory in Afghanistan, but worse is China is filling the vacuum. So let's be clear about what we're saying here. The Taliban is first filling the vacuum, but China is reaching out to the Taliban to be able to assist the Taliban with rebuilding infrastructure that the Taliban, by the way, destroyed again, and at the same time exploiting natural resources that exist in Afghanistan, certainly natural resources that I believe that China was probably already exploiting. And I've read a number of articles about various lithium mines and other kind of mines that China is involved in. But here is where I'm going with this. I think you'll appreciate this, podcast listeners. In my opinion, it is my opinion that the United States, at least I'm hoping, it's my opinion that the United States intelligence agencies and the Biden administration have intentionally let the country been taken over by the Taliban because they were fearful that if the Taliban did not fill the vacuum first, that China would. I want to say that again. Think about this logically. The Taliban took over, and we're all saying that's an awful thing. Okay, I agree. But what would be more awful? If the United States left, the Taliban were destroyed, and then China filled the vacuum? That would be really, really bad. So I have this theory that's not supported by the way, any article that I've read so far. Don't want to say that again. I've not read any article about this, but I have this theory that we intentionally wanted out, which as we all know is true, and we wanted, when we got out, for the Taliban specifically to take over. So that's why we allowed them to take over so quickly, because obviously we didn't have to allow them to take over so quickly because we're so fearful that the Chinese would fill the vacuum instead. And what we're trying to do is to get the Chinese involved in a quagmire. Remember, Afghanistan was occupied by the British, then the Soviets, then the United States of America, all of whom have failed. And so, hey, let's have the Chinese have a go at it with the Taliban in charge and see how that goes for them. Because let me tell you something about the Taliban. The Chinese can build as much infrastructure as they want. The Chinese can build as many lithium mines as they want. They can build their Belt and Road Initiative. They're not going to defeat the Taliban. They're not. I mean, unless the Chinese are willing, the Communist Party is willing to kill every single person in Afghanistan, which who knows, they're perfectly probably capable of doing that because it is a communist party and there is no election to hold people to account. But that's my theory about this. My theory is that we intentionally wanted the Taliban to take over. It was going to be messy. By allowing that to happen, by messy, I mean, obviously the optics are horrible. That's why Biden has been hiding. That's why his entire administration has been hiding, because the alternative would be that China would fill that vacuum. And if China filled the vacuum, ladies and gentlemen, that would be incredibly bad for the United States of America, as if it isn't bad enough. But hey, this all could still go wrong. Namely, China could still, in theory, fill the economic vacuum, in which case the Chinese could help the Taliban fuel terrorism and help Iran fuel terrorism with all of the money that the Chinese would theoretically be paying the Taliban to be able to operate in their country, in which case that could fuel terrorism against the United States and further weaken the United States. And that might be in part of the, might be part of the game with the Chinese. Certainly, what we do know about China is they just want economic power, and they are gaining it on a daily basis. And once they get that economic power, they're not going to release it willingly unless you want to have a fight with their military. And so that's why this podcast is called Taliban Roasts the American Idiocracy. I suspect that some of you have read CNN praises Taliban for wearing masks during attack. So I want to read this again. CNN, the Clinton News Network, praises Taliban for wearing masks during attack. So that's in the Babylon Bee. I know you're going to say, well, that's not a story. We'll get this. The Babylon Bee, of course, is a satire website that reports news that isn't so, but reports it in such a way that it certainly sounds reasonable, which is why it's funny. Thus, the reason it is satire. So the Babylon Bee. Headline, CNN praises Taliban for wearing masks during attack. Kabul, approximately 12 minutes after United States troops withdrew from Afghanistan, Taliban fighters have completely taken over the entire country, according to the Babylon Bee. Whoa, that's a bummer, said the Biden administration foreign policy team. We didn't see that one coming. As the Taliban began its campaign of shooting and killing, as is their time-honored tradition, CNN anchors gushed with praise after noticing all the Taliban fighters were responsibly wearing masks to protect themselves and others from COVID-19. Wow, quote, wow, in the midst of the battle and bloodshed, these noble desert knights of Islamic superiority are wearing masks. Bravo, said Brian Stelter. TV anchor and world-renowned polemicist Don Lemon was also quick to weigh in. Quote, all things considered, we ought to be praising the COVID-safe masks these majestic mujahideen warriors are wearing, he said. Quote, they are showing off all of us the proper way to behave during a pandemic. Something those horrible idiot Trump supporters don't seem to get, end quote. So podcast listeners, that was in the Babylon Bee. So apparently, this went viral, as so many of Babylon Bee's articles do go viral. So viral that Reuters, the so-called legitimate site of news, decided, you ready for this? They had to put out a fact check. Reuters. So remember, Babylon Bee is by definition a satirical website, and they wrote that article. Reuters says, fact check. CNN did not praise the Taliban for wearing masks. Screenshot originates from satirical website. So this is how stupid CNN's viewers are. I mean, and their readers as well, because of the fact that they would read this or see this somewhere and think that it's so and not understand the fact that it's humor, it's satire. So once again, Reuters had to put this out there. Fact check, CNN did not praise the Taliban for wearing masks. Screenshot originates from satirical website. So here's what Reuters said. Screenshots of a satirical article that says a CNN news reporter or news report praised the Taliban for responsibly wearing face masks have duped social media users into thinking the claim is authentic. Examples of the posts can be viewed here in the website, of course. An image appears to show a CNN news report with a breaking news caption that says, Taliban fighters responsibly wearing masks. One individual added in the comments, CNN is sick. So in other words, people are commenting after this article from Babylon Bee because they're so upset at CNN. Meanwhile, it's not true. One individual added in the comments, quote, CNN is sick. No wonder there are so many disturbed people in this country. Insane fake news. Another said, it has to be a joke. In other words, they didn't know. While the screenshot originates from an article published on the satirical website Babylon Bee, some users still posted the image of the falsified news report and took it out of context. The article published on August 14th is entitled, CNN praises Taliban for wearing masks during attack. And it's not true. The Babylon Bee describes itself as the world's best satire site and writes about Christian stuff, political stuff, and everyday life. Unbelievable. You gotta love, and this, oh yeah, by the way, Reuters has a verdict. Satire. CNN did not praise the Taliban in Afghanistan for responsibly wearing face masks. Screenshots of a satirical article were shared without context on social media. Can you believe this stuff? In other words, Reuters is kind of suggesting that Babylon Bee should be taken off of social media. That's kind of the suggestion because it's fake news. Reuters, I've got some really good advice for you. Babylon Bee isn't news. Babylon Bee is satire. It's humor. You don't want to take humor off of social media, do you? You don't want to take satire. Are we not allowed to make fun of CNN? I mean, it's just ridiculous how incredibly stupid these people are. So I decided that was just too good. It was just too rich, that whole story. So I decided to go to the next Babylon Bee, and I had one of my aides look this up. It says, there's another Babylon Bee podcast listeners. Taliban, here's the title. Taliban enjoys deep belly laugh over diversity training materials left behind by U.S. military. So here's what it, again, Babylon Bee headline. Taliban enjoys deep belly laugh over diversity training materials left behind by U.S. military. Can you imagine the U.S. military, if that was required by the people in Afghanistan, certainly by the military members of Afghanistan? And here's what Babylon Bee says. Kabul. According to sources in Afghanistan, the Taliban was having a deep belly laugh over the diversity training materials left behind by the United States military previously stationed there. Taliban fighters captured books like Anti-Racist Baby, White Fragility, and The Gay BCs and collectively cracked up over the ridiculousness of the gender ideology present in the works. As the American military evacuated quickly with no apparent plan or direction, many top secret materials were left behind, from battle plans and tactics to books like How to Be an Anti-Racist and Heather Has Two Mommies. According to the sources, after a busy 24 hours conquering all of Afghanistan, the material provided a much-needed break and some well-deserved laughter. Quote, "Oh man, this is great stuff, Allah be praised," said one Taliban leader, tears in his eyes, as he read through Pink is for Boys and Jacob's New Dress. Quote, "These American fighters thought they stood a chance against us. Pathetic." Quote, "Look at this book. The Americans think it is praiseworthy for a boy to dress up like a girl. No wonder they couldn't win in a war against us." At publishing time, the Taliban were kicking themselves after realizing they could have won the war much earlier if they just had called American soldiers by the wrong pronouns. I got to read that again. I'm sorry I keep laughing, podcast listeners. Says, at publishing time, the Taliban were kicking themselves after realizing they could have won the war much earlier if they had just called American soldiers by the wrong pronouns. They would have been so offended. They would have been, American soldiers would have been, "Oh no, I'm going to go tell my sergeant. Oh my God, he called me he instead of she, or they, or there, or what's some of the other some of the other pronouns we're hearing these days. I mean, I keep losing.
One with a Z or something.
Yeah, Z, Zer, and Z, or something like that. It's like, what the heck is that? So I have to commend podcast listeners. I have to commend the Babylon Bee for really not only just bringing humor at a time when, it's very sad for the United States of America and when we do look like an idiocracy, but at the same time, proving that America is in part an idiocracy because of the fact that we have a major news source like Reuters having to write a correction story and a factual story saying, well, that's not true what the Babylon Bee says, because apparently we don't have civics education that is sufficient enough in the United States to teach people the difference between satire and reality. And that's in part because CNN does report so much fake news without question. We all know that is the case. So get this, podcast listeners. As you've heard, there is a labor shortage in the United States of America. There is. And robots are stepping up to make French fries. That's right. So if you have heard and been to a fast food chain lately, according to the Wall Street Journal, just published last week, amid the labor shortage, robots step in to make the French fries. In a White Castle, the fast food chain White Castle, just southeast of Chicago, the 100-year-old purveyor of fast food, which is White Castle, has played host for the past year to an unusual and unusually hardworking employee, a robotic fry cook. Flippy, as the robot is known, is no gimmick, says Jamie Richardson, a White Castle vice president. It works 23 hours a day. 1 hour is reserved for cleaning. Glad they're cleaning it. And has operated almost continuously for the past year, manning or roboting the fry station at White Castle, number 42 in Merrillville, Indiana. Yes, Merrillville, Indiana. An industrial robot arm sheathed in a grease-proof white fabric sleeve. It slides along a rail attached to the ceiling, lifting and lowering each basket when ready, immune to spatters and spills, so it's not like a person that would get burned by, spilling or spattering oil that's, super hot. White Castle is so pleased with Flippy's performance that in partnership with its maker, Mizo Robotics, the chain plans to roll out an improved version, Flippy 2.0, to 10 more of its restaurants across the United States of America. There were more than 1.3 million unfilled job openings at restaurants and hotels in the United States as of just a month or so ago. Double the number a year earlier, according to the Department of Labor. So imagine that. You have Flippy, the fry machine, actually filling in. This technology is taking the place of human beings, which probably could have been done many years ago, but there was no incentive to do it at that time because it was an entry-level job to be a fryer, someone that goes in there and mans the fries. And as an entry-level job, at least you were learning a skill and you were starting out, you're learning how to interact with people, learning about how to get a paycheck and those kinds of things. But then when the pandemic started and has continued and seems to just, sometimes in some cases get worse in other states. By worse, I mean government shutdowns and vaccine passports and mandatory masks and these kinds of things that make it even harder to find people to work for all kinds of reasons. Here you have White Castle saying, you know what, we're going to try this machine called Flippy. And Flippy makes the fries, and that's one less job at a minimum per store, maybe two, but certainly one. And if you recall, podcast listeners, just like a month ago, we were telling you about AI, artificial intelligence, being used at McDonald's so that when you drive up to that little kiosk in McDonald's to order your food, and normally a person answers and says, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's, may I help you?" Instead, the AI is saying that. You place your order, and the AI electronically puts it on the expediter where the people then produce the food and package the food and deliver it to you at the next window. So that gets rid of another human being. So for all of those of you out there who think it's okay to sit on the sofa and not do anything, you know what's happening in real time? Businesses are adapting and they're morphing into what they have to do in order to be able to survive. And a lot of this technology, as I said, has been around for a long time, but now they're going, you know what? I remember that guy that, pitched to me like 3 years ago, that fryer machine that was automatic, and I didn't want to do it because I'm perfectly happy having people do it because I really support my people. Well, you know what? I'm going to try it now. And so another technological advancement here is Razer, the company Razer, is planning to make an ocean cleaning robot. I often talk about these kinds of high-tech devices in Mark of the Millennials because it's important to be able to understand. It's very important to be able to understand that there are many new gadgets and many new technological advances that are going to make the planet better, okay? Instead of just saying, climate change, they're actually solutions. Let's look for actual solutions and talk about those solutions. And we try to do that here versus go into the polemic of climate change, let's control everybody's life. So Razer wants to do way more for the world than make a cool mask to protect people from COVID-19. This is according to Technology Magazine. In a report by Game Rant, the gaming industry giant announced that they plan to build a Razer-themed ocean cleaning robot. So it's a bot. This is a boat that is a bot, and is a self-driving boat without a person in it, obviously, thus it's self-driving, and it basically roams the ocean and senses plastics and then picks them up and sends them into a compartment in the back of the actual boat or robot, and then brings it back to a much larger boat, which then only meets it once, of course, that robot is full of trash. And so they're going to deploy these out there. And, it's funny. I thought of this for a long time, thought this internally for a long time, podcast listeners, that technology really could solve a lot of these waste issues. Obviously, the best way to solve a waste issue with plastics is to not throw them in streams and waterways to begin with. I mean, that is kind of like a no-brainer. It shouldn't happen, but it does. And it happens, by the way, primarily in Asia. Okay, where, there really aren't restrictions on the environment, where there really isn't a respect for the environment. And we see all of that trash in the waterways and the ocean where it ultimately gets to. And this particular robot solves that problem. It certainly solves the problem of the existing plastics to the extent that, it hasn't sunk to the bottom. But at the same time, at least we can have the conversation about the fact that technology does solve problems, and we should look at technology as a way of doing just that. So way to go, Razer. Way to go, Razer, and way to go, Flippy, the French fry maker. I think it's a pretty cool thing. So podcast listeners, should there be a college exit exam? The Wall Street Journal has this great article out that says the case for a college exit exam. I'm going to read part of this article because it kind of is a lead-in to our dumbest bill in America. about what's happening in K-12 education, and I think it's in the state of Oregon, which is where the dumbest bill in America is, and we'll be talking about that in a minute. But the Wall Street Journal is talking about, at the college level, before you actually graduate from college, should there be a college exit exam? You know, an exit exam that kind of tests you for the basic knowledge that you should have as a college graduate. Should students pass a standardized test to graduate? Some think it would help employers assess the value of their degrees. Oh, imagine that. In The Future of Everything, which is a section in the Wall Street Journal that comes out from time to time, covers the innovation and technology transforming the way we live, work, and play, with monthly issues on health, money, cities, and more. This month is Education and Learning. How can you tell if a university graduate can think clearly, communicate precisely, and solve problems effectively? For years, confidence in higher education has been declining, along with total enrollments. Transcripts and diplomas don't carry much weight for many employers, as grade inflation has reduced the worth of a cumulative grade point average. Employers can't be sure that students have gained critical thinking skills over the course of a degree. At the same time, millions of jobs requiring a four-year degree can be done without that level of education, some corporate leaders say. Ohio University economist and professor Richard K. Vedder has wrestled with this dilemma and believes the future of higher education will include a college exit examination that would shine a light onto what a graduate actually knows and what they don't. It would tell prospective employers a lot about what a student has really learned while they were in school, he says. Professor Vedder, the founding director for the Center for College Affordability and Productivity in Washington, D.C., says he came up with the idea in 2004 as he was searching for a way to introduce more transparency and accountability in higher education. He likens the idea to licensing examinations in fields as far-flung as dentistry and plumbing. The 3.5-hour test would measure critical reasoning, and writing skills by asking students to analyze information from a variety of sources and write a persuasive essay to build a case. That would be followed by a 2-hour, 100-question multiple-choice test, which could assess a student's grasp of math, natural and biological science, statistics and data analysis, literature, history and government, economics, a foreign language of the student's choice, psychology, and geography. The last 25 questions could be from a subject of the student's choice, presumably their majors. And look, podcast listeners, I am a huge fan of this idea of a college exit exam, because one of the requirements that this Mr. Vedder wants to implement is part of the test, which would be the very beginning, would be a measure of your critical reasoning and writing skills by asking the student to analyze information from a variety of sources and write a persuasive essay to build their case. Now, I can tell you from personal experience, this is important because I have met many college graduates who cannot write. They cannot. I'm going to say that again. I have met many college graduates who cannot effectively communicate their thoughts in writing. They're college graduates and they couldn't do that. And it would be nice if this exit exam existed, and it doesn't have to be universal. Just some colleges, if you were to do that, some colleges that are out there, some professors, what would happen is we, the employers, would be able to evaluate the students who actually could do the work. Oh, wow, this student got a really high score on their critical reasoning and writing skills in their college exit exam. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to hire them. Kind of makes sense. And this actually leads into why so many people are down on the idea of college. And that's because of K-12 education and the constant dumbing down. And that leads us to the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer?
Dum 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 dum.
And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is dumbing down K to 12 education in Oregon. That's right, dumbing down K to 12 education in Oregon by getting rid of proficiency standards in high school. Yes, you heard that correctly, podcast listeners. Senate Bill 744A in Oregon is a bill that does the following. Here is what the staffers wrote about the bill in the state Senate in Oregon. This is from the evaluation people in the Legislative Services Department. Every state has one. Each state calls it something different. But these are the civil servants who wrote the bill, and they're defining what the bill actually does. So it's from their own words from the bill itself. It does the following. Requires the Department of Education in Oregon to review high school graduation requirements for all high school diploma options, establishes criteria for review, suspends essential learning skills graduation requirement for 2021 and 2022 school year, and the 2022 and 2023 school year, suspends the essential learning skills graduation requirement for the next 2 years, requires submission of report and recommendations to the legislative committees by September 1, 2022. What kind of report do you want? We didn't give the test, so therefore we don't know how many people know anything when they graduate? I mean, that's what they should put in the report. Prohibits State Board of Education from requiring students who successfully complete credit requirements to show proficiency in any other skill or academic content area beginning with the 2023-2024 school year. I got to read this again, folks. Prohibits the State Board of Education in Oregon from requiring students who successfully complete credit requirements. In other words, they successfully complete their academic courses. It prohibits them from showing proficiency or any other skill or academic content area beginning with the 2023-2024 school year. In other words, this bill is using COVID as an excuse to permanently get rid of graduation requirements that tell us that the student, as they graduate, are proficient in basic writing skills, spelling skills, math skills, science skills, history skills, civics education skills. Getting rid of all that, literally permanently getting rid of it, but using COVID as an excuse. As you can expect, I'm sure the teachers union is behind this. And so here is what local Channel News 21 said about this particular bill. New Oregon law suspending graduation testing requirement sparks debate. Yeah, you think? In Salem, Oregon, a new Oregon law that suspends the requirement for a basic skills test in math, reading, and writing to graduate high school is being praised by advocates as a way to rethink education standards and sharply criticized by others as a misguided effort that will hurt children learning in the long run. So the advocates for this bill say it's a great way to rethink education. What's the term they use for the police? Reimagine education, reimagine the police. Well, here we go again, right? Democrat Governor Kate Brown of Oregon signed Senate Bill 744 last month without much attention, intentionally, by the way. The measure temporarily eliminates essential skills testing through 2022 and 2023 school year. That requirement had been put on hold amid the coronavirus pandemic, which forced the closure of many schools and students to learn remotely. The Oregon Department of Education has said the new law will allow the state to develop more equitable graduation requirements. Equitable. There we go, folks. The Oregon Department of Education wants more equity in graduation. In other words, if you are someone who didn't do the work, right? I mean, let's say you have average intelligence and you should clearly be able to graduate from high school with basic proficiency if you were to take the test. But you choose not to do any of the work in high school, like you just don't show up, which does happen, by the way. That's not equitable to that person. Yeah, it's not equitable to the person that didn't do the work and still has the capability and decided not to show up at the class. You know, they were a no-show for the 4 years. It's not equitable to them. It's not fair that they have to take a proficiency test in order to get out of high school or to at least get a high school diploma. That's not fair. It's not equitable. And this is what the left believes now. This is all part of critical race theory, right? That people of color can't do the work, and therefore we shouldn't hold them accountable in any way. And by the way, to be fair, this law holds all people, no matter the color of their skin, unaccountable. Basically, I mean, you can be the smartest person, it doesn't matter. You can be the person that doesn't do the work, but could be relatively intelligent, doesn't matter. Because equity is about dumbing down everything. That's really what equity is. It's socialism, it's communism, it's Marxism, clearly. So officials have been told to compare diploma requirements in different states and find ways to reduce disparities and ensure that graduation requirements are fair. Senate Bill 744 does not remove Oregon's graduation requirements, and it certainly does not remove any requirements that Oregon students learn essential skills, Department spokesman Mark Siegel told Portland TV station KATU. Rochelle Chase, founder of MXM Block, an advocacy group led by Black women and focused on education and other social justice issues, said certain children struggle with exams and had been hurt by the testing requirements. Oh, give me a break. I'm sorry, give me a break. You can either do the work or you can't. If you can't do the work, then you know what you need to do? You need to study harder. You need to work with a tutor. And public schools provide that for you. Many of them do. And if they don't, then they should. That's how you get people proficient. You make them accountable. You hold them accountable, and then you make them do the work. And you say, I'm not going to just pass you just because you think I should. But that's what Rochelle Chase wants. That's her idea of social justice. Quote, under the best of circumstances, in totally normal times with no pandemic, there are a number of children who don't test well, Chase said, including children of color. Those in need of special education, low-income students, and early language learners, she added, it's not a deficit on the part of those children. So once again, don't lump in special education students with children who don't have special needs, but just choose not to do the work. What we're talking about here is children who they're perfectly capable of passing all of these proficiency exams, which are necessary for them to be able to graduate and function in society. Absolutely necessary for them to do that, but they choose not to do it. And now we're not going to even hold them accountable. Quote, they serve as checkpoints so that any kids who need extra help in getting those extra requirements, we can get them extra help to make sure they can graduate with the same proficiency as their peers. Folks, that says it all. So this lady says that we can get them the help they need to make sure they can graduate with the same proficiency. She wants proficiency not to be tested so that she can say all high school diplomas are the same. And they're not. If they were the same, then why do some kids go to Harvard? And why do some kids go to Stanford? Why do some kids go to Georgetown? Why are some kids not able to read proficiently when they graduate? How are they allowed to graduate from high school if they aren't proficient in math and they can't function in society by doing basic math and they can't read or write proficiently? They can't function. But according to her, the reason this bill is necessary is because everybody should have the same proficiency as their peers. When they graduate, they should be the same. They should all go to Harvard. It's not fair otherwise. So I'm just going to finish with this. So in the Wall Street Journal, it says, dumbing Oregon down, the soft bigotry of low progressive expectations for minority students. Why didn't we think of that? Politicians and school officials in Oregon are embarrassed that too many minority children fail tests designed to confirm they've mastered the essential skills that high school is meant to teach. So in the name of racial equity, they've now done the progressive thing. Instead of lifting graduation rates by boosting student performance, they're eliminating the proficiency requirement. So in other words, someone comes to you and they say, okay, you say to them, do you have a high school diploma? because this job requires you to be able to punch in the computer numbers and do adding and subtracting and also be able to read. Oh yeah, I can do all that stuff. I have a high school diploma. And then you realize that they can't do it because there was no proficiency requirement. There was no testing. And therefore you have no idea whatsoever that you hired this person who can't even function at a basic lowest level in society. And that's what Oregon is doing. And they're doing it all in the name of racial equity, CRT, and dumbing things down because people aren't allowed to be exceptional. They don't believe America's exceptional, and they don't believe some children can be exceptional, more exceptional than other children, because that's not equitable. That's not what equity is about. And that is the dumbest bill in America. And that is it for Mark and the Millennials, this particular episode. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.